Production and factory settings bring their own set of hurdles for wireless connections. Harsh conditions, both indoors and out, create a daunting task for engineers to work through. Now let me tell you, those engineers ain't looking to back down from a challenge like this, no sir. This here's where we gather round to tackle them hurdles, swap thoughts, and lend a hand. Welcome to the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop with your hosts, Scott and Jeremy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 27 of the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop podcast. My name is Scott McNeil, and with me, as always, is the intrepid Jeremy Baker. Jeremy is the guy who reads the release notes. All I do is click install. How you doing today, Jeremy?
I'm fresh in from the swampy conditions in Florida. I'm doing pretty well.
Who doesn't love swampy Florida? So today, our episode is all about the invisible design. It's the documentation, the layout, and the habits behind the scenes that can save a project, especially when you have multiple engineers and working on it. And then you will not be the person who's there for long-term support. So this ought to be a lot of fun. Some housekeeping events real quick. Be sure to check the WICO website, wico.org, and see what all the latest and greatest conference stops they've got coming up in various areas of the universe. And don't forget to check out our document library. We've got some conversion tables and reference charts and some best practices, white papers, free for everyone because information is all about sharing. We share so we can all get a little bit better. Anyway, on with the show, episode 27, Invisible Design. And today we have with us a man by the name of Trey Rushing, who also happens to work at Prism Systems with Jeremy. So he can give us a lot of dirt on Jeremy at the end of the episode that we can then use against Jeremy at a later date. So Trey, welcome to the show. And why don't you kick it off and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. I'm coming to wireless from a little bit, I don't know, maybe it's a common background, maybe not. I'm an electrical engineer by degree, and I've got certified professional engineer in controls. I've been with Prism now a little over 27 years, and most of my career was controls and software part of the business. Spent 15 years doing environmental reporting applications for paper mills and different things. So got a lot of background in communications from disparate systems, and that sort of helped me get into the wireless communications piece of it for OT. And I've been doing that now for over 8 years, just mainly wireless. And I've done I got about a little over 8 years of time, but probably it feels like 20 years of work, just because of the demands of a lot of the projects and everything. But I've really enjoyed it. The change was nice in my career, and then the challenges of wireless, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a whole nother universe, man. And then you put the industrial and manufacturing spin on it, and it takes it even in a different direction, you know. But being that you guys, work in the same universe that I do, everything's project based, right? And most of the time we're not brought in for long-term support. So our jobs are to go in and evaluate and then give paths to remediation. And then sometimes they hire us to do the remediation. Sometimes they do it in-house. Sometimes they hire somebody else we don't know. But regardless, we're getting paid, so it's all good. But that's where what we do in general can have a huge impact if we're not running our projects properly and we're not documenting everything properly and we're not following, best practices that we tend to preach. So. And that's really one of the biggest things, right? A lot of times too, the project itself doesn't fail, but the documentation does. You get everything up and running and everything seems to be working great, and you leave the site, but now nobody understands or remembers why certain decisions were made. Why did you use XYZ channels? Why did you place the radios in these specific locations? How come, 2.4, we're not touching it all when, we should be using it? But what they don't know, and there's no documentation for, was, you did some spectrum analysis and 2.4 is just completely eat up by machine noise. So it's completely useless in the grand scheme of things for any sort of industrial automation use cases. Um, I know with our team, when we go in and we're doing evaluations and the first thing we do is we start everyone's favorite Excel, right? It's Excel spreadsheets. We gotta get our VLAN documentation set up. We have to get our IP schemas set up, and we have to figure out the data flows, and we try to map all that out first. Um, and then so we even have a documentation reference point moving forward. So even as we're working on the build and we're trying to do the remediation, we already have documentation to work for. Um, I don't know. I've had to go in behind um, other engineers who did not work for us and have to try to understand their thought process on things because they didn't leave any documentation. And so now company X is paying us a lot more money to go in and figure out what these other guys did, and then provide them with the documentation. And then when you're going through it, you find out half of what they have done was really wrong for that situation. And so now you end up creating documentation of what you have, and now you have to create a future state of where you need to be, and this is what you need to change to get there.
I would say a lot of our opportunities come from a bad installation or a ticking time bomb, right? Like it worked whenever it was first installed, and then at some point either that extended or the environment around it changed and everything is broken. And why, how do we need to address that? So that's we've had a lot of opportunities come our way through that situation.
Yeah, a big part is just doing assessments and going in and assessing, that we'll get both from the network side, a lot from the network side, and then from the wireless side, and they'll have us come in and they'll say, why does this not work? It worked for 5 years continuously, and then it just stopped working. And then as soon as you start digging into it, you're finding uh Cat 6 cables, terminations that are falling apart. You're finding radios that were just not installed correctly from the get-go. And why are you using a 9 a 9 dB gain 2.4 Omni on this radio where you have, cranked up to 23 dBm on your TX power levels. And then you're going to install it at an angle.
Oh
So
yeah.
instead of following its standard, kind of pancake 360, you've installed it at a 45-degree angle. So now you've got this weird flying saucer shape, and then the extra reflection you're getting off of that is just crazy. And so the multipath fading is just destroying anything that could be done. And then you're shocked, how did it even work in the first place? But that just goes to show you too, kind of the robustness of Wi-Fi in general.
Yeah, I got a service call a couple months back that was was like an in-house, like a metal, not a like a full-on steel manufacturer, but it was just like a metal fabrication process. And they had this gantry crane that was supposed to like pick and place boxes from one section onto a like an outfeed conveyor. And we started looking at stuff and they're like, well, it drops when it gets kind of over in this thing, and so I got them to start sending me pictures, and they had like an 18, and this was probably 400 feet long. They had an 18 dB directional antenna on both sides of it, angled, so when it was close, it was in the actual like primary lobe, and then as soon as it moved, it was out. And I was like, this is, you need a basic Omni, like there's
18 dB.
Yeah, it
Good
was
Lord.
wild.
What was the power set at on the, what was the
Well,
transmission power set
it
for?
was probably like set at 10 or 12 in the radio, but and then Trey, Scott said something about terminations falling apart, but I mean, we've had some stuff where we're trying to remotely support some of these systems, and you find out that they're like punched out, like not even using like Cat 6 wire, right? Like, have you seen somewhere it was like actual like 18
The
gauge wire or something?
the loudest thing that I've seen on a connection is where they use the terminal block to
That's what, yeah.
splice the cable. Literally, you see it come in, go through terminals, and then connect up to something on the other side.
I
I
used to see
mean,
that a
the
lot
disconnect
with
you have
telephone
to
systems.
have for that to make that move with communications is bewildering to me. Like, how did you go from clipping off an RJ45 to putting this on a terminal block, to make this work? There's
Well,
no
I mean,
documentation for that one, I can guarantee you.
and then not only is the termination, falling apart, it's not labeled either, so you don't know where it goes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So is this supposed to be going back to a patch panel? Is this a single line that you're running back to a PoE injector or directly into a switch? Where is this going?
Right. Right.
And then
It,
if you're lucky enough that it is labeled, then you have to roll the dice and is it labeled correctly?
yeah.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
fighting now on a project is everything's labeled, but it's labeled wrong. And things are not going back to the cabinets that they say they're going to one cabinet, but they're going to a different cabinet.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we just sent out a kit going to a site where we've got somebody working, and on the vehicle, we don't necessarily trust that the antennas have been connected correctly. And we do sort of an acceptance test to verify all the connections, but the routing of the antennas is such that it's not going to be easy. So what we ended up doing was building cables where we stripped away except for that center element, and we're just going to use a continuity test with with a multimeter just to verify that the connections are where they should be, right? And what we also recently started doing was ordering. I got to where I was starting to order color coded cables,
Okay.
especially where you have radios with multiple internal, or
Hmm.
devices with multiple internal radios. And then use like blue and red, something common. Put that on the connectors, and then also on the antennas, especially if we're like in an industrial environment where they don't care. Mark those with the same color. That way, visually, we already know.
Hmm.
Uh, because a lot of times what we'll have is, we'll have a radio that's got two 4x4 internal radios. So you got 8 antenna cables coming in and out of that thing. It's mounted on a column. The antennas are 6 feet apart, but at some point those cables come together, and good luck looking
Yeah.
from a distance and being able to figure out is that correct? You know.
Well, even on some of the outdoor radios, they have multiple Ethernet connections.
Mm.
So I've been working with some outdoor Wi-Fi 7 Fortinet APs, and the they're coming back to some Cisco IE 3400s, and but we couldn't get a 3400 with a strong enough PoE to be able to power it with one cable. But with those particular APs, you can actually bridge power across both ports on it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it is nice. So it's 30 watt per cable, and it's just boom, and it's powering the radio right up. It took a little while to kind of get the nuances hammered out on that, and there was a bug in the FortiGate software or firmware. But once I got past that, it works like a champ. You know, uh, but they were also running spare cables at the same time, so per radio, there's three cables, but they didn't mark which ones were plugged into the radio.
Mm.
So during commissioning, each one we're having to sit there and play round robin and see which one responds to the actual. So I'm sitting here logged into the switch, having them plug it in, unplug, plug it in, unplug, till we can see what's actually negotiating and working properly. So yeah, cable labeling is a huge, huge thing that can make any project a whole lot easier if it's done better. So that's why when you have um, a structured cabling company that does things right, you hold on to them. You keep that phone number, and you try to get
For
them on
sure.
as many jobs as possible.
Yeah. And I think once you learn that lesson too, especially with the same customer, it's pretty easy then to continue those good habits, right? Like, remember, we're color coding all these connections going forward and having them labeled this way, and that stuff is that usually goes well. We have radios that have multiple ports, but they don't have PoE on both ports. So they require PoE plus on some models PoE plus plus. But I actually noticed recently that I was on site that they had both of them plugged in, and I'm like, why? Because if the PoE one fails, which is your primary connection, that radio goes down. And then I think it was just that they had to do something with the spare. And
That's entirely well. Again, with those Fortinet radios, that they bridge data as well, so you can actually use that as almost like an aggregate link. And then which is so you can conceivably push more data down through uh, the
okay.
cabling if you're actually using that much data on the wireless.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not saying everyone's rushing right out and trying to put multiple gig across
I
Wi-Fi,
don't I
let
don't want to use
alone in
that
an
much data.
industrial environment where
Yeah.
it's just going to be supporting some fork trucks running around. Um,
Right.
but by God, you can do it if you want.
Yeah.
We've had a bunch of people recently, we're on some of these applications with like the Wi-Fi 6 gen, and it's um like the data rate mechanism in them is, it's going purely off of like RSSI and stuff. So it's in a really noisy environment, and it just stays pegged at like as high as it thinks it can support, and the retries are just absolutely wild in there. And it's you have the hardest time talking to people about like, if we restrict the data rate, this will make the demodulation more robust. It'll make it easier to, for you to get that even if the signal goes lower. And they just freak out when you're like, yeah, we're gonna limit it to like 54 megs of throughput. And they're like, well, what is that? Is that gonna slow everything down? And it's like, well, if like you're not doing, you're not repeating a bunch of messages 5 times. So like, yeah, there's less throughput, but also like this vehicle is like sub 1 meg traffic, requirement. Like even if you had, 30 vehicles on there, like you're not, it's a fun conversation, like trying to
Well,
educate
it's because
people.
everybody falls for all the marketing, right? Bigger, better, faster, more. I want giga throughput. I want, this radio says I can do 42 gigs across my wireless. I want all 42 gigs.
Yeah, we're
But
like, we're like,
your
hey,
your
send
your
that
throughput meg
sales
is in the
guy.
K.
Yeah,
That's what your devices need is like 100 kilobits.
yeah. You just say, hey, send the sales guy into the server closet and let's get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Recently, earlier this year, I was at a port in Singapore, and it's the first time that I've ever had to try to convince a customer, let's not lower the MCS out of the gate. Let's see what we can do. Like they had found out about that move, right? To lower your retries. The problem in that application was it was like tele-remote RT rubber tire gentry cranes. And so the problem is that the throughput was like super high. Right? Well, I say super high for OT.
Right.
You're talking about the goal was like 180 megabits on these, which is
That's a lot
which is really difficult, um,
to
especially
support that
outside,
and the
right?
mobility at the same time.
Yes, outside with the latency requirements, and they had completely overcomplicated this whole deal. But anyway, um, but when we were out there testing and we were able to kind of get the throughputs, one thing that did happen is they lowered it to 80 megabits, which is still pretty high. when you're trying to maintain that sort of throughput with the latency requirements. And but I was like, look, yeah, 7 MCS with 2 special streams might be what it normally is at, but let's just let it go and see where we get, because with this type of throughput, we do want it high. We need it high.
Right.
We need that data to clear as fast as possible. So we don't need to. Well, I agree. We don't need to spend a lot of time on retries. We need to see where that true MCS can live and try to drive whatever we need to keep it high. So if it is lower, let's increase TX power, whatever we can do to kind of raise that up. But yeah, it was the first time that I'd ever really had to. Is usually I'm having to educate them, like you're saying, on lowering the MCS because it's a low throughput, and we need to get those retries lowered so that it'll clean up. But yeah, that was the one case where now that I've had in my career where we okay, let's raise it. Let's try to keep it higher. I
Right.
know it looks great on the on the telemetry when we lower it, but we need that data throughput.
You said let's put it in Tim the Toolman Taylor mode.
Yep, that's right.
Did you start grunting at it?
Yeah.
If you're going to put it in Tim the Toolman Taylor mode, you got to grunt at it. Let me ask you guys a question. As an outfit, are you guys, when you do drawing documentation, are you guys like a CAD shop? Is that primarily what you guys do, or are you a bunch of Visio junkies like I am, like Visio or Draw.io or something along those lines?
A lot of Draw.io, a lot of Illustrator. I use that quite a bit.
I
Um,
haven't heard of that one. All right.
Adobe Illustrator.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah,
Adobe.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
It just because a lot of our like our layouts and stuff like that will be coming in on PDFs, and it's a good tool for us to use just to create a ton of layers
Okay.
through the design that we can turn on and off to generate, predictive heat maps and what have you, and lay everything out. Uh, we do have AutoCAD. We're just not AutoCAD experts. So recently, we contracted someone out to help us with like some of our AutoCAD and modeling. So our customers are using like the cloud construction,
Hmm.
Autodesk cloud construction to lay out. They prefer to lay out everything in the model, the construction model, and the whole project is run off of that model, which is it's kind of neat in that you can kind of see where you think you might want your APs, and see if there are any clashes that are going to happen before you get too far into construction.
Right.
I normally resist putting anything installed permanently until we're ready. An industrial plant is one thing where you've got, columns and the environment is where what it's going to be. But then some of our customers have a more fluid environment that they're working with. So
Right.
in the construction, and they need to test their mobility applications during construction, different phases. And
Which
so
that's got to be difficult because you
it
don't even have the
is,
finished product yet.
yes. So you don't even have the walls necessarily or the surfaces that are there in the beginning. And you've got to support this vehicle communications. And then, what we're normally doing is using test stands and things like that just to hold up the network and just make sure that testing goes well for what they need. And then we're usually periodically tuning during that process to readjust as the environment changes until we reach the end. And then that's where we normally like to then fall back to our permanent positions. Um, and sort of do it that way. But more and more, everybody always wants to know where is the APs going, so they can just use their low voltage contractor to
Right.
go ahead and install everything. All the wires are buttoned up. It's a lot nicer to do that. But
I used to do a lot of pre-planning in Visio. Just because that's kind of my preferred drawing environment. It's what I'm used to and whatnot. But I got to tell you, uh, my predictive software has made me lazy because Hamina with their 3D rendering and whatnot, just building the entire project in there, especially now that you can do structured cabling runs in there, and you can put cabinets in there and you can put switches in there and it'll generate you an inventory. Um, that has really kind of made me lazy because I can lay it all out right there as long as I'm given um, proper plans to scale that I can then calibrate in the software. Um, but the big thing about that is being able to create that report link for the client. And then you just send that link to the client and they can sit there and they can browse through whatever it is that you sent, whatever you've sent them in that report. They can look at the 2D, they can look at the 3D, they can fully explore everything. One of the latest projects for one of our clients those have been invaluable and have been constantly used by their OT team and their structured cabling people to help them route all their cabling right, you know? So while it's made me kind of lazy in one aspect, it's done a lot of a good for the customer relations and helping to smooth some of the structured cabling aspects because it eliminates a lot of questions because you've got that visual that you can sit there and touch it, feel it, taste it, and see where it needs to go. And they can say, oh, well, you know what, we're going to have to do an alternate route around this. They get a hold of me. Hey, can you just kind of change the cable routing on that? Sure, I can do that. That's 20 minutes on a drawing, and then it shows up for them. They print it out and they're handing it to their guys to go do the corrections. Um, so like I said, while Visio I still use a lot for standard network drawings and whatnot, not so much in the wireless world anymore because of the Hamina goodness that I've gotten used to.
I got myself in trouble with Visio a couple of years ago because I didn't realize, like, if you're pasting a graphic of a switch in there or something, once you get a certain amount of stuff in the file, it just becomes so big that it
Yeah,
would bog down. And
yeah.
and it's like, okay, I better just stick to rectangles.
I don't know. I got something like 4 gig worth of Visio stencil files.
Mhm.
Because I go to the manufacturer and whoever has Visio packs, I'll download them. We've had to create a fair amount of our own custom ones, but it is what it is. But all of us in the company use it. The process team, the controls team, the MI team, and us on the infrastructure team. We all use the crap out of it. So
Well, and I think too, like one of the things you're saying is like starting out with the Excel files, you know, not so much on the entertainment side because those are usually kind of like longer span projects, but we'll get pulled in to like look at one of those systems that's was running fine for 5 years or 10 years or whatever, it starts having problems, and then you start asking for documentation and there's just absolutely nothing there. So that's all that stuff. It's like that's kind of like the immediate first step for us, and I've tried to impress that on when I send guys to site, it's like if there's no documentation, then you need to start it because you're going to have to touch it. Somebody's going to have to come there behind you. And then and even if it's just hey, here's a spreadsheet of IPs, and if you're not,
absolutely,
if
even
you're
as
not
something
using
as simple as
something,
that can be a huge help.
yeah. But and then like, if it's a small installation, hey, make all the IPs hyperlinked so that way you can if it's a web configuration thing, you have to go in and keep that stuff. And I've been doing these projects for long enough now that I'm starting to have to go back and find like documentation I produced 8 years ago on
Hmm.
projects sometimes, and it's like, oh, it's nice that it's nice this
Oh
exists.
no, totally. When you're going back to a site that you haven't been to in several years, and you can go back to your files and pull up all the documentation that you made during that project, and so it's an instant refresher.
And I
And
mean,
that
even stuff,
that's
even stuff like just like a down and dirty cheat sheet on like iPerf commands and stuff.
uh-huh.
Um, we had a we had a project several years ago, and one of the newer guys was like having to do some iPerf stuff, and it's like, dude, write a basic how-to document. And then Trey, I think I sent that to you last year or a couple of months ago um, for something. But it's like then that stuff is, and I mean, it's even stuff like we go on these AGV calls, and so like, hey, it's a Siemens radio. Here's how to run the signal recorder and set up the logging. Well, I don't have to retype that email, every single time
Right.
into that. I can just say, hey, here's this Word document. Here's the screenshots. This is where you enable XYZ logging. Here's where you go to do this, save it. Here's the file naming structure. So it's easy to like open up
The,
all that kind
the
of stuff.
guys laugh at me because I use Notepad for everything. I just love me just some simple Notepad.
Yeah.
And it I know this is going to sound really stupid, but it's because Notepad lines up all the characters. And so you can make cool little like nice and neat like notes and
Oh yeah.
whatnot, and line them up and whatnot. But as soon as you copy and paste that into a Word document, it's all kind of and none of it lines up anymore and it looks terrible.
Yeah. I like Menlo. It's like my favorite now, like monospaced character because it's a little cooler than Courier, But
Nothing's cooler than
I
Courier.
still get the formatting that I want. Oh yeah, I'm with you, brother, on that. It's I love a text document. In fact, I mean my library of just text files for different things now has grown so much.
I
Because
just have
you don't like even the iPerf stuff, like I don't it'll be 4 or 5 months before I do iPerf again.
yeah.
And it's like, damn, what was that? What was that what was I doing?
Anytime I have to go research a bunch of commands for a specific project for be it switching, be it wireless, be it, routing or firewalls or whatever, I create one of my notepad cheat sheets and it goes into and I have a file here. And so here a lot here recently for another client, I've been doing a lot of per port DHCP. And that's a bit of a pain to config on Cisco switches, but once you have it configured properly, it works really well. But I do it once a year, you know. Um, I have all the steps for doing proper port channeling, because I'm not port channeling stuff every day. So I instead of sitting there and fumbling through with question marks in the CLI, I just open up my little notepad and like there's my whole procedure right there. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. I also don't use Visio because I use a Mac. And well I
You're one
could
of those guys.
yeah, definitely.
You're
Oh
outnumbered
man,
here, Scott.
I love my Mac. And it's got a lot to do with that I mean how easy it is networking wise, like to manage your virtual LANs, right? For all the connections that you could ever want to do. But also the terminal built into it is so much like, Linux and Bash that there's a lot of similarities between those two OSs as far as using those tools. And we do a lot in Linux as well for a lot
I
of our
gotcha.
software tools that we build. So that's been super nice. But I'll also say like from an integrator kind of documentation as far as the work that we do, we most of our guys standardized on secure CRT for our terminal
I
tools,
see that a
right?
lot. Yeah.
And the logging features of that are just phenomenal, in my opinion. And so, I mean, there's been cases where I've gone back to look a few years to, what happened on this radio for the. I know there was something, on this command or something I was looking for, and I found it, in a
Right.
log that I had 3 years ago. And so, yeah, talking about when we were kind of before the show started talking about AI, I've often thought about running a local LOM or something like that and loading in all my logs just to kind of, ask it, things.
Oh, just let it be your
What
log
happened?
parser. Yeah.
Yeah, what do I do here? What have I done in the past, for
To me,
this?
that's kind of a marriage made in heaven right there. A local LLM built in as a log parser, so you can just ask it specific questions and let it take care of everything for you instead of you trying to read line by line and then your eyes are bleeding after 30 minutes,
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, even our new guys, like we hook them into that, and I try to emphasize pretty early on, like make sure your logging's turned on. so that you're capturing like when especially like show run configs like that. It's invaluable.
I got to break down and just get a license for secure CRT. I mean, I use putty obviously, because that's kind of like your universal default tool. And then I
Yeah.
use MPutty, which is just a multi-tab flavor of putty, and it just pulls everything from your putty database and puts it in a nice tabbed format. Nothing crazy. It's free and it works well. I like it, but I really need to break down and get a secure CRT license. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
like they're that much. It's just the pain of asking my boss that, hey, can I go spend this $80 and get this?
Yeah, that's true. It's completely worth it though. Go ahead and get
Um,
the Secure CRT Secure FX bundle. Um, but if you deal with like what we do with Linux machines at all, and like
yeah,
you need to pull files, they have a built-in file transfer utility that can come right off of your sessions that you've saved for all of those, and it's just super convenient and be able to manage all that.
No, man, I just keyword search my notes for my SCP commands, and I'm not Scott. I get in trouble with them because I'm not. I don't touch this stuff as regularly with the CLI, so they give me crap for not. I let my
did
security
you did
lag.
you say SCP or ICP?
Yeah, magnets. That's right. We're not talking about magnets and torrent links or how they work. We're talking.
No, I
No,
thought you said
I said
ICP, and I was like,
SCP.
what does insane clown posse have to do with this? But
You got to get your Fago file from
Uh,
one juggalo to the next.
well, now
um,
we're moving into like with the Cisco URWB stuff, which we're pretty heavy into. They're moving into WLCs, and which is away from the standalone networks that we've been dealing with for years now. And moving from a CLI to a GUI is not it. Coming from my background before that, where I worked in GUIs most of the time, but now I'm so into the CLI. It's I don't. There's not a warm and I don't. It's not a warm and fuzzy
yeah,
feeling.
no, it's painful.
Don't. Yes, and
It's
I did the
painful.
like this past year I was at WLPC, did the boot camp on the WLC. Chris Avance, he's a phenomenal instructor. Really enjoyed that class. But we just scratched the surface over 3 days of that WLC, and then all of the different things that you can. It's an all-in-one type deal, right? It's like it does controls everything when the scope of what we're doing is just a fraction of that. So trying to cut through all of it just to understand, like, I just need to do this thing.
Right.
Where do I find this parameter that I can do the thing that I need to do? And yeah, it's a different world, but we're gonna have to do it.
Um, Jeremy, you mentioned earlier that you were helping a client troubleshoot some stuff, and you had them send you a bunch of pictures, and that brings up the point that that's really one of your mainstays of documentation is getting pictures of everything, pre-install for design, post-install for validation. But a lot of times in a lot of the different planning software and whatnot, you can actually inject pictures. And then I know, like with my Cyberscope, if I'm going out and doing surveys and validations, it's got a camera built into it, so I can sit there and it's an Android device, so I can sit there and take pictures of various locations and actually tag it to the file that I'm about to upload to Link Live, which is a huge bonus, and it's helped me out several times. Because then I had this nice, when I'm sitting here and I'm looking at all my analytics up on the screen, I got this nice little picture of this box that just got ransacked by a forklift and is now hanging by 3 wires from the ceiling. And there's I don't know, I just your cell phone too has become just one of the most important documentation devices, providing you have a camera pass. and so it's someplace you really have to take pictures.
Yeah, you better have that.
I have yet to be thrown off a site for not getting a camera pass. So that's something I go out of my way to make sure. Because
Yeah.
I've had coworkers forget about that, and we didn't have one, and they were escorted off the property.
Yeah, I'm always like, may I take a picture of this? I don't take pictures unless I have permit. And then sometimes, depending on who it is, you're like, can you just do this so that way I don't get in trouble?
I had one site that, because of what they produced, I could not get a camera pass, but my escort could take pictures of whatever I wanted to for me. And then he had to, he had to submit those pictures to security, and then they had to approve. So like 4 days later, I finally got all the images, but they only edited one, and it was because it had a partial name of a machine on it in the background, and so they just blurred that out. And I'm like, all right, hey,
Nice.
that's fine. I have no problem with that. But it does make it kind of um, a pain when you're trying to get your documentation done. Now you got to wait on these images and whatnot. But um,
Sometimes I want to get pictures of the AGV tire prints because they make these really cool patterns. I'm like, oh man, this would be like a really cool like art show that's like, then I'm like, nobody would care about that.
what
Yeah,
other
that's
what other things do you guys use while you're like out in the field to like try to do proactive documentation? Because that's a big thing, right? Because it sucks if you have to sit there and you go and you do your preliminaries, and then you do your survey, and then you build your predictive, and then you go through with uh, remediation and install and testing, and then you realize, oh crap, I got like 4 days of sit down documentation I have to do now, and hopefully I can remember everything. Um, I got to get better about that in the grand scheme of things, because I tend to do that. One thing I have started that's been helping is just taking little voice notes, just a little voice recorder on my phone. Um, and it's not like I have to be super descriptive, you know. So to anybody else, they're a little cryptic, but to me, I know exactly what it's talking about. That's helped. That's helped some. So when I do get stuck in that after project documentation rut, um, that helps a lot along with the pictures.
I do a lot of like my finger in the in the field of view pictures. So I'm like,
Oh my gosh. Are
this
you
is the thing
serious?
I'm looking at.
Dude, I thought I was the only person who did that when I'm sitting there and I'm holding my phone up, and I got my finger and I'm doing this number, and the guy walks up to me, he's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I was like, "Shh," you know. Because I'm trying to point at a specific point on the ceiling so I don't get lost in the picture noise around it.
I'll do that, or I'll like I usually keep like post-it notes and I'll write like a note on it and hold it in the field of view. So it's kind of like if you're marking up like a PNG or something.
I gotcha.
So I've got something there to look at. But I usually take like a clear picture and then a picture of it like that too.
I've
Sometimes
also noticed that like I got the new iPhone, I guess, the 17 Pro Max, but the camera on this thing is amazing. So like I was at a site where I needed to know the network drop labels on a thing that I couldn't get to. So I was able to stand from a certain point, right? Like, I mean, I'm 20 feet away and take a picture, zoom in, and read the labels on the. I mean, it's a single gang, right? Like
Right?
a network drop with 3 ports on it, and I'm able to. Can I use this port? And here's the number. And then I sent them a picture, and they're like, "Yeah, I think that one's available." I'm like, awesome.
Well, a few years ago, Apple finally caught up and surpassed Samsung on their cameras. So I can't give you any grief about that.
Okay.
we've had in some cases like not a lot of projects, but like there have been times where we've used like drone photography or like 360 cameras and stuff like that. Which if you can do that is really nice because then, if you capture as you go throughout, then you can actually go back and do kind of your like not necessarily VR headset, but you can actually kind of replicate that like standing in space, looking around and checking the relation to stuff too.
Yeah.
For the voice recording thing, I've actually thought about getting one of those
Like
like
pocket
little
things.
pocket, yeah, that'll like snap on the back of your phone and
Hmm.
like you could carry around if you needed to, but it'll actually record and go ahead and build the transcript
Hmm.
of what you're talking about. Because I too find as I guess it's my age that I don't recall as much as I used to, and if I don't, start journaling now in the
Right.
process, that some things get lost. And it's always good if you have somebody else there too to get a second set of eyes, and then you can discuss like, hey, did I recall? Was this right? Like that? Was
Yeah.
it like this? Well, how was it? And kind of get that other validation. You know.
Yeah, Trey, we were talking about that last week. Like, like what kind of tools can we get to help improve like not, like conversation retention?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then that's tricky too because with your agreements with your customers, you don't know where that falls. So, meetings with them is one thing. Meetings within, an internal group, of course, you got a lot more flexibility. But yeah, who's recording what and can they record and that kind of stuff gets kind of tricky. But I'd love to have transcripts of all of my meetings, so I could go back and refer because we're using yeah, we're also ramping up like in-house uh, for project management and sort of documentation. We're going with Atlassian on their Jira and Confluence tools. And in the past, we'd used OneNote and Excel,
Hmm.
and we've gone back and forth with different products to kind of do that. But now I think we're making a real commitment to kind of making this work. So, but I still find that even with the templates, right, like you get a good structure that you can start with a meeting and taking notes. But then when you get into an in-depth conversation, I just forget about taking the notes, and I'm
Yeah.
focused in on what the debate or the discussion is, and trying to address the problem. And then later I'm like, oh man, what exactly did we kind of like? What was their position, and why did we eventually land on this point? Sometimes that's a little more difficult. So I'd love to have the transcripts of everything.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to get transcripts when you're in, video calls and meetings like that because just about every platform can do that for you. But the in-person meetings, I mean, unless you're sitting there scribing notes constantly, but the problem with that is then you're not part of the conversation.
Right.
All you're doing is trying to understand what everybody's saying, and you never get to voice your thoughts and opinions on specific things that they need your thoughts and opinions on.
Yeah. Maybe that's another position we need in our company. The big companies have it, like the note takers and the
Right.
dedicated project
Stenographers.
managers that are keeping up with all that.
So
But
everybody needs a court stenographer to run around with them, right?
exactly.
I'll just sit there with the little keyboard.
It's one of those miniature keyboards, so it makes you look like your T-Rex arms.
Yeah, where they just
Yeah.
like type like syllables or something like.
Uh-huh. I don't know, man. That's a special kind of human that can do that, court stenography. Um, well, let me ask you guys a question. On the back end, when you're doing this, do you guys have a particular naming standard that you guys use like that pretty much transcends the projects you already know that you're going to do, like a naming convention that starts with like area, then building, and then specific location? Or do you guys because it's one thing in the IT universe and in your enterprise universe where you can sit there and incorporate floor and room number and office number and all that. We're not in the carpeted spaces, right? So we're out on the floor, we're getting dirty, or in y'all's case, a lot of mobility. That's kind of outside the scope of what you can really throw in a naming convention to really help you understand what radio is where and where it belongs, or what piece of equipment it belongs to.
That so for the stuff that I typically run into, it's already like an established facility. So a lot of times, probably 95% of the time, they've already got something similar to that. So we just match that. Um, yeah, Trey, I mean, is that I think that's probably similar on entertainment.
Yeah, it's different customer to customer.
Well, I mean, do you guys
But
get much in the way of greenfield where you just get to kind of set the bar, or is most of it like my stuff is like mostly brownfield?
it is, well, I mean, it's greenfield, but the customer still has their own sort of naming conventions. And like some of our customers we have a really in-depth design and documentation phase that's extensive. I mean, it, I complained about it in the beginning. It's like, man, I mean, this is such a huge chunk of the cost.
Right.
And in the end, like I would say only a fraction of it is, realistically usable. There's a lot of it there that nobody's ever going to look at. But it, going through that process over several projects, my documentation is much better. Just coming from a double E background too, though, I think attention to detail was always it's a huge deal, right? Because your control system, it has to be accurate, right? You
Oh, totally agree.
through your layouts and your design. So and when even when I was in college and co-oping, I was a CAD guy then learning, and that was a great probably learning process, was to learn how to document and the design part of it, right? But now with the sort of experience I've been through on design and documentation through this process, I've gotten much better at that piece of it, from cable schedules, uh, points of interface documentation, all of it, just making sure that everything is consistent and right, and that consistency is really the key, I find, to a lot of the work in every aspect of it, in your design, but also in your implementation, your configuration. And then that's another area I feel like that's a good place to document, is wherever you can in your configuration. If you've got host names, variables, label, make your code and configurations as readable as possible, if
Right.
that's available to you, right? And your switch configs, right? Your port descriptions,
Absolutely.
make them work for you,
Oh, dude,
where you
totally.
don't
Well,
have to guess.
these are some of the invisible things that I was talking about in the very beginning, right? That it doesn't affect the overall performance of the end result, but what it really affects is support on the back end, and being able to help with troubleshooting and figuring out other issues, and or just optimization.
Oh yeah, for sure. Having those port descriptions is invaluable. The few times that I've had to come across and there not been anything, just sort of everything's on VLAN 1 or whatever, and it's just like, what is going on with this system? It's a situation where it probably worked, in whenever they were testing and whenever they got it up, and now it's gonna be, it's not it's not supportable going forward. Uh,
Right.
and so then, going back and trying to figure that stuff out can be very, very painful.
Well, we go through all this and we talk about all this documentation and all the kind of essentially best practices that we really should be doing to help all these things go smoothly. But it all comes down to final deliverables, right? Um, and I mean, I don't know about you guys, and I'm sure you have, but I kind of have a standardized deliverable package that I do that I operate from. Um, on, typically it involves a large report. And then I go through like all my heat maps, or actually I go through kind of a generalized project statement first. Then I go through all of my survey maps broken down into various aspects. Then I go into very specific issues that I have either uncovered or have been reported to me by the client, in which case then I'm expanding on them based on what I found. And as I look back at my deliverable reports over the years, they've been pretty consistent, but they've everyone seems to get just a little bit better and a little bit better, and once you get, 40 of these things under your belt, I mean, that's a lot over the course of just a few years, right? That means you're really out there hustling and trying to put all this stuff together. But, you know, even though I have kind of the standard of what I do, I also at the same time am trying to constantly improve them and make them more useful to the client. And I find myself um, going off on essentially educational tangents in them. So this is the issue. Here's why it's an issue, and then going, on a couple paragraph explanation. And uh, it has been invaluable because more often than not, when I start getting feedback from the client, they see those explanations because they're not the wireless professionals. They haven't, this isn't their, that's why they hired us. That's why they brought us in. But they still need to have a certain level of understanding. And so when you can kind of break it down for them in a paragraph or two, um, it becomes something they really appreciate. And again, it's another one of those invisible pieces. It's not affecting the running of the system, but for understanding and support on the back end, it becomes invaluable. I got 3 pages worth of vocabulary I put in the back because I would rather have it and not need it than to need it and not have it, if that makes any sense. And it's not like it really bloating the report. The report's already 40 some odd pages. So, what's a couple pages of some reference material?
Yeah. So it's some of the stuff is kind of like preset on at least on the entertainment side, but um, to just like maybe touch a couple of high points with an anecdote. So we had a senior engineer for a while that passed away a few years ago. He was my direct mentor, and we ran through this. So this kind of touches on like naming convention and some of it, but um some of the stuff like trying to go back through the reports and stuff, it was, you could kind of tell like he'd spent a bunch of time being the like a solo business, and then when he came in to our company, starting to work with a team. But it's like having those meaningful names. So like, we had to search through all this documentation looking for past projects and stuff. So from like even like the naming conventions and stuff, like making all that stuff work for you. So what I initially did was, all of our projects became, the project number, what type of job it's a WLAN audit, it's a point-to-point design, it's a troubleshooting call, whatever, the customer name, location, and then if it's like subbing for another, like, here's the AGV manufacturer's name. So that way, if I have to come back through and search for it, if I know the project number, I know it was, um, Shiny Butt Road, Michigan, or, wherever it is, right? That stuff's searchable. But even kind of to your point of like that, just that little legend at the back, we started adding stuff like that because if it's like a WLAN audit or something like that, they might not be, it's not necessarily like your direct interface at the company. It's you're giving them a premium product, right? Like that's,
Exactly.
it
Exactly.
works, but what am I looking at, or what do I take to my boss to do that storytelling for you? And so it really is like,
Well, you
you
also never
know,
know whose hands that's going to end up in.
yeah.
Is it going to make its way to a C level and that they need to read this and understand what's going on, and have you explained it in simple enough terms to where they can get it, but it not be insulting, right?
Mhm.
And not written in crayon, um, but it's amazing. Again, just some of the feedback that I've gotten in the past where it ends up going to the plant manager. I'm like, why is the plant manager reading that? But
But
okay.
you
But
know,
then you get the feedback of how much they appreciated that extra effort that's in there.
yeah. So depending on the type of job, right? Like if it's a point to point link, like your final report might really be like, hey, your infrastructure side, your access points here, your clients here, here's pictures of the mounting, here's the measurements of the link, here's the throughput test, and boom, you're done. And then here's a little like Excel snippet from, the frequency planning, power settings, any kind of like
Exactly. Yep.
SSID, that stuff. But, there's also some projects where like, you have to have like hey, what's the theoretical, like high level view of what's the system supposed to achieve. And then there's documentation that's like, cable, like the cable schedule. So like, this access point plugs into this switch in this control room. Here's the head end, here's the tail end of that. If it's like a full warehouse install, then there's a couple of different documents that we'll put out for that. So like one of them would be like the as built. So we've given
Hmm.
the low voltage contractor all the installation stuff. Now it's installed. Here's a picture of every AP. Oh, by the way,
Right.
this is supposed to be off column J5 at a 15-degree angle down this. And then here's a separate spreadsheet of this AP was designed to use 12 dB of output power if it's a static channel assignment or something like that. And then in a separate document, the same kind of way, there's like the, post installation validation, or, like the actual, like everything's running. Here's this in production surveyed and written up. But some of the stuff, and I don't know how much we can say about it, Trey, but the entertainment stuff is kind of different than kind of the typical commercial stuff, because then there's site acceptance testing, there's factory acceptance testing, and so it's like, okay, can you prove it out on a bench with two radios,
Well,
and
in situations like that, I imagine too, they're probably dictating to you what kind of documentation they want. Because the clients you're referencing, they already know what they're talking about, and they already have certain standards that they adhere to. Um, so I'm sure part of that documentation, they're dictating to you exactly what they want.
even some of that stuff, it's like we've gotten into some kind of weird stuff where it's like, oh, I don't, maybe it's not weird, but it's like, can we just pass the back in the earlier fluid mesh days, right? Here's this specific protocol that we send over the wire. Can you get this across the wireless link? And we don't really care about over the air at that point. So we've got two radios on the table with antenna cables wired directly together with attenuators running through them. And just, can the radios pass that information across, and does it fail? Or, if
Right.
you have a redundant system, what happens if you induce a failover on the bench and all that kind of stuff?
Can it handle the RPI, the controls that are set? What kind of latency is going on with it? I gotcha.
And
Yeah,
did
we
did the
also.
sales guy say you could have a one millisecond of latency?
Oh, yeah. We actually had one guy. I went to a vendor site who was building a vehicle, and we were going through their design, and I'm like, okay, so what's your packet interval on your ProfiSafe? I think was this application. And they're like, oh, it's the default, which is 2 milliseconds, and I'm like, not gonna work.
Nope.
And I'm like, where did you? I thought you had, somebody had talked to you about the wireless system, and the standards have already been established over several projects. I mean, you should know that we're normally aiming for 30 milliseconds, and we can go as low as 20 on some things, but it really depends on throughput, packets per
Oh,
second,
of course, of
all
course.
this other stuff. But they're like, well, the guy told us that it's better than wired. And I was just like,
Wow.
I was like, you should have escorted him out immediately.
That's a
There is
hefty claim
no
right
there
there.
there is no wireless that's better than wired. So unless you're talking like a serial connection compared to the latest and greatest wireless. Yeah, it's no. get that guy out of there. So it is an education process. And you know, I do enjoy, I appreciate if we have the time and the budget to do a proper final documentation on the jobs. Too many times we've spent way too much time troubleshooting other issues and gone right to the end, and then we're kind of throwing together, the final documentation, and we'll often go ahead and subsidize a lot of that just to make sure that we're putting out a good product. But when we're actually able to take the time, there's been times where I've gone through the final training documentation on one of these larger entertainment projects and spent a tremendous amount of time on it, though, because I've gone back and also, not only do you test your system, but sometimes you need to test and verify your documentation. Follow those steps and verify that the result is the same every time. Because
Right.
what we often find is that we've got an inherent set of knowledge that we don't often identify, that the person coming to this with little to no experience will not, they're not there, right? You can't make the assumptions that they know to set the subnet mask to whatever, right,
Right.
on their machine to be able to access the network. Like
You've
they're
created your VLAN interface on your MacBook, Nick, and you forgot about it
yeah,
8 months ago.
I don't expect that of anybody. We'll go ahead and make sure that they have an access port, where they can just, connect up. But they may have to set a static IP. Um, but it's that level of stuff, and I've had training documents where we'll do like technician level, like we'll do an admin level, and then we'll do a subset for the technicians. You know,
Yeah.
what does it take to replace a client on an autonomous vehicle, right? Like you got to go from new in the box. So it's like, make sure you got the right firmware, or you make sure that you get the correct configurations. How do you identify what the correct configuration is? How do you test that? Make sure that it's the correct configuration before you go and you install it on the vehicle. And then what's the appropriate process for the installation?
Right.
Are you over torquing all the connections? Don't do that. Here are the parameters to what you should be doing, right? If you're replacing antenna cables, make sure your bend radiuses are correct. There's a lot of those things, those little details that need to go into the documentation.
You mean a 90-degree bend in your antenna cable is not acceptable? I
Right,
thought
right.
you get
Yeah,
that nice little crease in it and just goes doink. I
yeah,
thought that actually kind of helps it because then it's
yeah.
geometry, right?
And I like the Ultraflex cable, for kind of going through and fire and stuff, but just because it can be so flexible doesn't mean make it so flexible. That's a lot of education that goes on early in the project too with the
Absolutely.
installers, right? Like I've now got a cut sheet of, here's the cable installation requirements. Here's the one-time bend radius. What does that mean, one time? You bend it once and you don't let it go back. It
Right.
stays there. Right?
You don't let it go bad. That's your one time, and then that's kind of like, letting the smoke out of a device, because once you let the smoke out, you can't let it back in. That's a one-time deal.
I've I've witnessed, like in the old fluid mesh days, when because they had a certain mobility radio with M12 connectors built in.
Yep. I know
And
exactly what you're talking about.
I I watched a guy install that and then proceed to put channel locks on the M12 connector. And I mean, he just crushed. You just heard all the plastic and everything in
Oh,
there
snap.
just crackle. And I was like, yeah, there's what you don't do. And I took a picture of that just to make sure, like, I could use that for an example in all my future documentation. Right? Like here's one of the examples of if you over torque.
Right.
Did you ever run into a situation with any of the M12, especially on those X coded, where you don't put it in with the right registration and you've like because I had one where like a pin actually got pushed into the connector, and so it was shorting out, so it would power the radio up, but it wouldn't communicate because that pin was like pressed
Yeah.
into the plastic in the
Oh,
connector.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's like in those operations manuals. I mean, we even have like in some of the ones I've done, it's like this is, here's a picture of it. Here's this registration mark. This should seat onto the cable before you even screw it. Like
mm-hmm.
And I don't
I don't
use,
even, I always try to get pretermed now instead of me having to terminate the X code because that's such a pain. And I
that's what I
can't
was
tell.
going to
And
say.
those X code ends are not cheap. You're not buying a lot like a bucket of RJ45s. Those damn things are expensive.
mhm.
Yeah, we don't use those unless we absolutely have to. I can think of the only time that we used a field terminated X-coded adapter was we had a really long, like an energy chain connection on something that was going up and down, and they had run out of patch panel space, and so the only way that we had to do some sort of an inline connection, and so we used I forget the brand that we ended up using, but they're not all made the same either. Like
Right.
there was and we had to have a particular technician come out who was really, I mean, it's the best that I've ever seen. Just such an attention to detail to maintain the twists on a Cat 6A all the way to the ends and set those connectors, and it was a work of art, like, right, like if you've seen a lot of techs go around and do stuff, when you see somebody who's like, oh, that's the dude.
Yeah.
That is,
I was sitting on the end of a chip stacker in a wood yard while the chip stacker was stacking chips. So there's chips just flying everywhere, and here I am trying to re-terminate this Xcode uh it was for one of those fluid mesh radios. And man, I went through well, that one wasn't bad. I only had to redo it twice because the whole end of that boom was shaking the entire time that I was doing it because it's just giant machinery. That was not fun.
yeah, yeah. I've
Then I
also
got
seen
yelled
it.
at for going through so many M12 ends.
Yeah, I've also seen somebody like, you had to like one connector, you had to fasten the pins on each one of the wires, and then twist that, and they had like a plastic piece that would mold and hold all the pins together. And so you had to kind of build this connector, then pull the casing up to lock it in. And then, the height of all the pins, you got to make sure they're exactly correct. Me and this guy were fighting it. I mean, he was doing the work. I wasn't doing it, but what we finally figured out a method where he could use super glue to tack in the cable once he
Okay, so
got
I
it
was
into
using
the correct.
this was a pass-through design, so it was easier.
Yeah.
I didn't have to glue
Oh
anything.
my God. And that's when after we got through with that connection, I was like, you know what? There's got to be a better way. We're going to look for a better way. So I was like, because it can't take, 3 hours to build each one of these terminal connections. You
No,
can't, you
no,
can't spend this
you'll
kind
eat
of
up
time.
all your project time in terminating cables.
Exactly.
Then you have to get a
Exactly.
change order to actually do the configuration.
Yeah.
That's where you get a short jumper and then you get a really nice coupler and you just RJ45 to RJ45 and then you've got your pre-built.
Or just replace one of the RJ45s with a keystone and just make sure that thing's locked in there.
Well, I mean, so all of these, a lot of these are kind of learn as you go, OJT kind of things, right? Um, and the good stuff you remember, the bad stuff you try to forget, but nobody else lets you forget it. So you end up remembering that anyway, even though you don't want to. But I mean, these are the things that help make that project a lot more successful than it could be, than as it should be, because it could take a lot longer. It could be a lot, well, how would you say that? A lot less optimized or not optimized. It could perform barely to standards what they need instead of performing above their expectations. Um, all these little things add up, even though the typically the final results and the operation of it never see it. But it's what benefits everybody else on the back end for ease of support. And it's what honestly, it's what gets you called back to site for other projects, right?
For sure. For sure.
So
I think
there's a lot on the back end that if you just make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's and providing the kind of documentation that you would want going to a site, really goes miles and miles for that project.
yeah. And I think that and if you're consistent in sort of your delivery and you've delivered what you promised, that goes a long way because
Agreed.
there's a lot that of times that doesn't happen, right? Like there's a lot of promises by sales that don't get realized. But if you're consistent sort of in your design and your expectations in it, funny enough, it actually works the way that it was
Absolutely. Well,
designed.
and that's something both you and Jeremy have touched on, throughout this whole thing is being consistent. So consistently doing these things, consistently having your documentation, consistently making sure your reports are inclusive of all the details that you need them to have. It's that consistency across the board is what gets the client to pay you to keep coming back for either expansion of that project or new additional projects, or even just bringing you in for consulting because they don't have a choice because corporate is saying they have to use XYZ, but that doesn't mean they can't bring you in for consulting to keep them honest, right? Um, so all of these invisible things in the background can do wonders for project success overall.
And
I want
Scott,
to,
I think, real quick too, like, having that documentation too, because I know that sometimes, customers, it costs money to have us come to site or like do things. So when you do provide like a good documentation package, they're not having to come back and say, hey, we've got a fresh spare in a box. Like we need to pay you 4 hours of consulting time for us to be able to apply this configuration to it. Like you've you've given them that process and stuff. And hopefully when you're doing when you're doing like the in-person knowledge exchange, the customer on the other end isn't, like scrolling dating apps and ignoring you while you're trying to explain stuff to them, which I've had happen. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely like having that knowledge, it's like, because they've already paid you to give them that information. So you don't need to do it. It's like, it's not really fair on their end either to like give them subpar, like the documents package where, they own that product now. And
well, no, you bring up a great point. So before we wrap this up, that deliverables meeting, honestly is a really big deal. Some people don't think it is. I happen to think it is because it's not only you just handing over a packet of information saying and drop it on the desk and good night and good luck and I hope it does well for you. It's the actual discussion and going through specific pieces of the reports and going through specific things, especially when there's gotchas and you want to make sure you call out those gotchas that if you don't install something in this very specific way, you run these risks. And you want to make sure you point those things out while you actually have FaceTime with them, be it, in person or on remote meetings and whatnot, as you're going through that. So I think those deliverable meetings are very, very important to the entire process.
For sure. Um, you, the and that's always the fun part is explaining, you know, the going through the explanation of what you're doing. There's a reason they called you is because usually they didn't know what to
Right.
do. And you're providing not only the solution, but the supporting documentation that not only provides the kind of the map and the for the solution, but it supports your expertise. right? Like,
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that part of it is a dog and pony show, right?
yes,
Because you want to you need to show off what you've done for them and whatnot. But the other part of that is a big portion of that. A big portion of that is the education process. This is what you now are in possession of. This is how it was installed. This is what you need to do to take care of it and to make sure that you can maintain it properly.
yeah, absolutely. It's unfortunate, but in everything, things degrade over time, and there will be things that will have to be addressed in the future. So the documentation is pretty important.
No, I couldn't agree more. Trey, I want to thank you for taking the time and coming and hanging out with us. Jeremy, my co-pilot, glad you made it back from swampy Florida. And stick around, gang. The Industrial Wi-Fi Shop will be back again soon.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and we hope you join us on our next episode of the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop.